maybe not everybody's not aware of this. We've had a couple of officers murdered in the line of duty. These were a couple of the most famous ones. So Bill Pogue and Conley Elms. They were responding to a complaint of some close-season bobcat trapping in the desert in the Waihees, and they ran into an individual out there by the name of Claude Dallas, and he ended up murdering them and dragging their bodies away and hiding them in the sagebrush. They did eventually catch him, and it's kind of a crazy story, but he broke free from jail at one point after they had caught him, and he went on the run again, and they caught him a second time. And he only ended up getting 25 years, and then he was released. So he still occasionally returns to the state of Idaho.
What's his name?
Claude Dallas.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember that.
So yeah, and it's kind of interesting that the response and the jury, about who's at fault or who's not at fault, right? It was kind of considered, well, you had a right to shoot stuff when you wanted to or needed to.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of, I would say, he got 25 years, but that's not very much for murdering two individuals. So there's actually a third conservation officer that was murdered that was kind of an unsolved case. This is Ellsworth Arthur Keed. He was investigating a poaching complaint in 1934, Shoshone County. He was supposed to be back for an event the next day, and he never came back for the event he was supposed to be at. They found his car, they found his lunch in the car, they never found him. For a while, it was the biggest manhunt in the state of Idaho. They had over 1,000 people out looking for his body and trying to find him. Never found him, and it just kind of went by the way, right? He was declared dead like 8 years later, and that just was kind of the end of the story until a couple of years ago. And Fish and Game got some information and reopened the case, and then went to the Shoshone County Sheriff's Office. They investigated it, and they had pretty reliable information from a family member that one of their family members had murdered the officer, but he had since passed away, so they wanted to bring it forward so it could be resolved. So kind of an interesting case. So he also got added to the National Peace Officer Memorial in Washington, D.C. So kind of a interesting story, but 90 years later found out, and kind of solved the case 90 years later, but very interesting. Okay, so Conservation Officers 2025, what do we do? This is the Clearwater Fish and Game Officers, which would include my district. This was us in spring training last year. So 50 to 75% of the time, we're generally doing regulation enforcement, so that's patrols, right? That's investigations. That's just anything relating to enforcing regulations and finding violations. So the lower left there is kind of an interesting case I was involved with. This was back in 2017. I got a call from another officer that he had heard a report of a closed season elk being driven in a pickup truck into this area. This was up in Boundary County when I was assigned to Boundary County. And it was a brown pickup truck. And he went looking around in the area that evening, couldn't find it, but had a general idea where it was. I came into the area the next morning, and where I was driving, where the houses were that he thought it might be in, I went across a mountain road, and I went across the road, and I could see two deer hanging down by this house. I went around and met up with them. We're at this driveway. The driveway is very rough driveway, just unimproved, just basically rocks and boulders, completely off the grid, about a half mile long driveway. We're sitting there at the driveway, a pickup truck rolls down and comes to a stop right in front of us because we're sitting there at the end of the driveway. Start talking to them. It's a couple brothers and a sister. And through talking to them, they're like, yeah, we've got a couple of deer up at the house. We have to see licenses. They're like, we don't have any. Like, do you have any ID? They didn't have any identification. So at this point, we're starting to think, well, this is a little weird. And we're like, where are you going? And they're like, we're going to work. You don't have a driver's license. And they're like, yeah, that's what we do it every day. Okay, well, let's go back to the house, look at the deer, and address this. So we go back to the house, and there's not one deer or two deer, there's a whole bunch of deer. The elk is there, so that whole pile on the left was just deer heads that they had stashed there from critters they'd been killing. So, really nice individuals, but they were living off-grid, so they didn't have any electricity, nothing. They were born in a backwoods cabin in Missouri. Mom and Dad never took them in to see a doctor, never took them in to see anybody. So no birth certificates, no social security cards, no proof that they'd ever even been alive, right, other than that they were working. And they just drove around and did stuff. In fact, it was very interesting that they were actually working for one of the county commissioners at the time. And I went and had a chat with them afterwards, and I'm like, did you look at their driver's license? He's like, no, I don't bother people with that. And it's like, you might want to. So, anyways, but yeah, unfortunate, you know, and of course their excuse was they couldn't buy a hunting license. Well, they couldn't even get a driver's license because there was no proof they existed. So, kind of a weird one. So, completely off the grid family, like I said, really nice folks, but unfortunate. So, and they just killed stuff when they needed meat. So, no seasons, no limits, just whatever they got. So the next bunch of deer out there was a case. I didn't end up solving that case, but I got a report of all these deer, and there ended up being 5 deer within about a 4 or 5 mile stretch on this road. And obviously somebody had come by and just thrill shot all these deer. This was I just picked them up in one morning, so 5 deer. I did donate one of the other ones at the time, so there's only 4 in the picture. I had some prime suspects in that one, and ended up getting them on a couple other close season deer that they spotlighted, cut the heads off, and then just dumped the carcasses. So I think I caught the individuals involved, but you know, that one's kind of up in the air. That's one of those maybes. Like, it's really been nice to get a little more on that. So this is something I just kind of see every day. So I don't know if anybody's a bear hunter in here, runs bear baits, any of that stuff.
A small little camera.
Just typical, you know, non-compliance. This was July. You have 1 week after the season closes.
Nice little
to remove
digital
your
camera.
bait barrel and any other stuff there. Obviously, a bunch of litter, a lot of trash, bait barrel left there. Just kind of typical day-to-day thing that we're seeing and working on. It's not 10 deer.
No.
Those are unusual cases.
I had a camera this tiny before.
Landowner stuff. We do a lot of landowner relationship things. Like in this particular case, this was up on the Palouse. This got a call from a landowner that somebody had trespassed on his property, and you know, as you can see, they shot a deer down there in the draw, and there's a gut pile down there. They drove down through his field, and unfortunately, after this happened, he said, "That's it. No more hunters on my property." Period. So. Just a reminder, you know, when you guys are out there hunting, respect your landowners, because it makes a lot of difference. Hunters can be their own worst enemy, you know, just thinking it's not a big deal, but that could be the, straw that broke the camel's back. And this is just an example of some more all unlawfully taken animals, either no tags for the moose, both the moose, and both of those moose were wasted as well. They were shot. The lower one there, they shot the moose, out, trespassed on private property, cut the head off, and then a county road worker stopped and he was checking under bridges and stuff. There was a fall, so they're doing some cleanup stuff. Found the head underneath, and we went and sat on that one and ended up catching the guy coming back at night to snag the head. So the other 2 bull elk is not cases that I worked, but another officer worked. Both shot with the rifle, both during the archery season. So people cheat the system, right? Some of this is kind of older data, but you can't really see. But if you look, it's just statewide violations, detections by year. It kind of bounces up and down. All that being said, violation detection rate has gone down. Total violations detected has gone down in the last 10 to 15 years. There's a number of reasons for that. Some has been staffing issues since 2008, but part of that also is, I complain about it a lot myself. We just do a lot more paperwork. We have a lot more training requirements. And when you take us out of the field those extra days, we can't find the violations, right? If I'm doing training, if I'm doing paperwork, if I've got this, it's kind of a frustration on my part, but it is what it is. this is always hard to measure, right? You know, people talk about, well, you're going out there, you're enforcing the law, you know, it doesn't really stop anybody. It actually does, and this was just a good example of that. Somebody put a sign up there, no salt, please. Department of Fish and Game has trail cams in area, I know firsthand. Right? So deterrence does actually work. It does. I found it amusing now. But how do you measure deterrence, right? There's no metrics, there's no, and so you have a day, you go out and you work, you don't find a violation, and it's like, did I accomplish anything? And I'd say, yes, you did. I mean, public likes to see you out there, all you guys are sportsmen, and you like to see people out there making sure that the resource is there for you, in the future. Okay. So, won't skip through this, but this is just, part of the job of being a conservation officer is establishing good relationships with your prosecutors, with other law enforcement, with your judges, and working through the system. I'd also say this is one of the most frustrating parts as a Fish and Game officer, is working with primarily prosecutors and judges that don't get it. Either they don't hunt, they don't fish, or,